Welcome everyone. Welcome to Euractiv and welcome to this panel discussion, Heavy Duty Vehicles, What Future in Europe's Automotive Sector. My name is Jack Parrock. I am a moderator for Euractiv, delighted to have been asked along to host this discussion today. A big welcome to everybody who's sat in the room with us and to everyone who's joining us online as well. This is a Euractiv event supported by ACEA and they want to welcome you obviously as well. And we're going to have a possibility as we go throughout our discussions for questions. So the first thing that I'll ask everyone in the room to do, and you can also do this online, is go to the Slido tool. So you can either go to slido.com or you can, there's a QR code up on the screen and there's some pieces of paper that are sort of stuck on the windows for those of you in the room. You can scan that in and it will take you to the right page where you can get onto the Slido. All of the questions we'll do through Slido for everyone in the room as well. And you can post your question. When you do post a question, do me a favor if you can and direct it to a particular one of our speakers or state that it is for all speakers. That makes it nicer so we just efficiently get it to the right person. And if you are posting about the event on Twitter, X, LinkedIn or whatever, use the hashtag EADebates. So, I'd like to welcome our panelists first. I'll introduce all of them to start with. We have Axel Valkyrie, who is the Deputy Head of Unit for Sustainable and Intelligent Transport in DG Move of the European Commission. Welcome, it's great that you're here. We have MEP Jan-Christoph Oetjen, who's a German member of the Transport Committee in the European Parliament. It's great that you're here. We have Stijn Daniels, who's a researcher for Transport and Mobility Leuven. Thank you so much for being here. We have Mitra Kerben, who is the head of the Brussels Corporate Research, the head of Brussels for Corporate Representation at DHL Group. Wonderful that you're here as well, thank you. And we have Thomas Fabian, who is the Chief Commercial Vehicles Officer at ACEA, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. Welcome to all five of you. We're really grateful that you've taken time out of your day to come and have this discussion with us. Let's just get straight into this. I mean, it's a really big issue how we're going to deal with heavy-duty transport and what we're going to do going forward. Perhaps for you, Axel, we can start with a bit of an explanation of what the Automotive Action Plan has done from the European Commission, like what the plan is, and how it's going to try and help the industry decarbonize.
Thank you and good afternoon. Indeed, the Automotive Action Plan was a major exercise in the beginning of this year, and let's not forget why we did it, because these are really challenging times. I think there is no reason to discuss around that. The economic context conditions are not great. Business cases are struggling. But amidst of all of that, we have to acknowledge that we have seen great progress over the last 3 years. So if you remember the time we adopted Fit for 55, we discussed with the Parliament and agreed, and the Council on, AFER and CO2 standards. There were always questions, will the vehicles come, will the infrastructure come, will the users be ready for this transition? And now we will be shortly coming up with a report, and we can see that a lot of things have happened in these years. And I think the technologies are there. The context conditions are a little bit difficult, so we need to put more emphasis on making this transition work. And I think that is exactly the purpose of this Automotive Action Plan, sort of a look throughout the series of instruments we have at hand, from sort of regulation and regulatory simplification to financial support to bringing people together and ensure that this transition remains stable, on course, but with better incentives and better support. I think that's in a nutshell, and then we can discuss about the singular actions we have in the plan.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of our other speakers have particular ideas about what needs to be in there and what they've seen from it. Let's come to you, Jan-Christoph. What are you doing in the European Parliament? Where does sort of EU policy match up with what you think needs to happen in order to decarbonise the sector and to keep it economically competitive?
Maybe it's me. So I would say first, what is important is awareness rising, because we are talking a lot about cars and about electrification for the cars, and trucks are very often forgotten. So It's a lot about discussing and seeing, okay, first, is the infrastructure ready? Because Axel rightly mentioned that there's a plan on infrastructure, AFIR, but is AFIR enough in order to make the operations possible? Because if you have it on paper, it works, but in reality, it does not work. We have a mismatch. So it's about this infrastructure question. And then we have a big issue at the moment because the base of going zero emission is that there is a business case for the companies. And this business case at the moment is lacking because batteries are heavy. And so the load that the truck can carry is less with the battery. And for this, there's a legislation that is foreseen, which is weight and dimensions, but weight and dimensions is stuck in the council. So member states are not moving forward on this topic, which is urgently needed because without this regulation, the whole plan of decarbonizing, going zero emissions, so going electric, will not work, and then we will need other solutions.
I mean, and this is it. It's a bit chicken and egg at the moment. There's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of technology that's ready, but the infrastructure's not there. We've got some great companies in Europe doing great things, but it's the sort of tipping point needs to move on. Stein, I'll come to you. From your research, are there sort of any easy wins in the HGV sector? Are there ways that this can really just start? I wonder if you can give us the context of your vision of what's happening at the moment.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I don't believe in quick wins or easy wins in this kind of matters. So, but there are some wins possible. We have been doing a study also on behalf of the Commission, and part of it is released, part of it not. We had some workshops where some of the people in the room might have been joining, and at least two things are clear, two main barriers for the bigger uptake of zero emission heavy duty vehicles. One is clearly the cost of the vehicle for the user, and in this sector we always talk about total cost of ownership. That is determined not just by the acquisition cost of the vehicle, but by many other variables, of which some are simply quite uncertain, and that makes it more difficult for consumers to decide. And the second element there, the second big barrier, is maybe the availability of recharging, mainly recharging infrastructure, certainly in the shorter term, meaning that grids are not adapted everywhere. The connectivity is sometimes an issue, the long procedures for permits, etc. So there are some barriers, and it's not up to us to tell policymakers what to do, but at least removing those barriers will be needed to improve further uptake of the zero emission vehicles.
Yeah, and we'll talk about a bit about those barriers and what policy options could be there to remove them. Let's come to you, Mitra. You're right on the front end of this. DHL is a company using tons of trucks, obviously having to look at it from a business case as well. What are the sort of conditions required for a quicker uptake of decarbonising technology? What do you know about it from a company perspective?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me in this debate today. Before I answer maybe this question in particular, let me also tell you where we are coming from, because a lot of people always think like DHL has like so many vehicles. Yes, we do have globally around, let's say, 120,000 vehicles, of which are, let's say, 40,000 electric vehicles, but in the smaller segment, so we're talking about pickup and delivery, these are the vans. And out of these, we have 250 electric vehicles globally, out of which 50 in Europe. So just, let that sink in for a moment. And of course, I mean, Stein was mentioning a lot of these like insufficient enabling conditions that we're talking about at the moment. And I think we really have to put some pressure behind that. This is so important, and it's also nothing new. Everybody in this room, I think like at least with half of them, I have been discussing it for years. So the question for me is how can we accelerate that actually? I mean, when it comes to grid capacity, grid connections, but also the costs of energy and also the cost of the chargers. And we can talk about that in depth going further. But we have seen a lot of commitment from the Commission also in the recent publication. So of course we welcome it. But I think what I really want to maybe point out in my introductory statement is that we're running a little bit also out of time because we need to do more and faster. So this is one thing. The other thing is also, of course, while we're doing it and while we're focusing on really like, you know, moving up and moving faster, we also have to see what are the current wins, what are the current solutions that help us as companies to really reduce our emissions now. And there we're coming to bridging technologies, there we're coming to interim solutions that are at the moment helping us to reduce our emissions. Because let's not forget, I mean, we're talking on the one hand side about the EU climate target, but for us as an individual company, we have our own sustainability target. That means we want to meet 30% sustainable fuels by 2030. We want to increase our share of electric vans globally by 66% by 2030. These are very ambitious targets, and they're also verified by the Science Based Target Initiative. So is our net zero target in 2050. So it is very important for individual companies to really look what can we do now. And I don't say, you know, the now comes before the what we want in the future, but I'm just saying it has to go hand in hand.
This is it. You have to have your commercial realities on the day, but then also a plan for the future. Thomas, let's come to you. What are European automakers making of the action plan to start with, and what do they need? If you can give us a bit of a sort of barometer of where your members are at the moment.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon. I think I can echo a lot of things that have been said earlier here. So first of all, we're obviously happy that the action plan does recognize heavy-duty vehicles, right? It's kind of a humble position to say we're mentioned in the action plan with the heavy-duty sector, but it's an important recognition that the heavy-duty and the commercial road transport sector is different from the passenger car market. So that's an important thing. And there's also, we acknowledge this, good focus on the enabling conditions. Commission has mentioned the infrastructure in various measures and also cost parity measures that are in there. Unfortunately, we think most of them are rather long-term, and this is where our concern comes in. So, I mean, for example, the European Clean Transport Corridor Initiative that is mentioned in there is a great initiative. We like it. At the same time, it feels a bit like a pilot project, right? Let's help everyone to electrify or decarbonize certain corridors. While we're actually at the moment, Mitra, you mentioned this, should be in the phase of mass deployment. We're at 3.5% zero-emission vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, first 3 months this year. We need to be at 35% in 5 years. And this is to take your picture, chicken and egg here. This is where the chicken, perhaps the commercial vehicle manufacturers get a little nervous because we're the only ones here that face regulatory penalties if things don't work out as planned. And this is where we think the action plan is actually missing a critical element, and that is recognizing the interdependencies in the sector. So we think what we need to do, and this echoes a lot of what you said earlier, Mitra, we need to double down on the enabling conditions. We need to be much faster when it comes to infrastructure, cost parity, grid connections, a lot of that. And at the same time, we need to accelerate the review of our CO2 standards, because we're not helping our industry's competitiveness by potentially penalizing vehicle manufacturers with something that they're not even responsible for.
So I suppose this comes back to you, this set of enabling conditions, but also this concern from the industry. What do you make of what Thomas has said there? And I suppose this is where policy intersects with market forces as well, in some sense. Perhaps you can talk to the thinking behind the policies when you've heard what you've heard.
No, first of all, I can sort of support. I mean, we've been discussing a lot of these issues over the past months and years, and you see that many of them have been picked up in the action plan. And I think it is indeed a broad focus, not on one instrument or one problem, but on a host of them. So we have, for example, an issue on the demand side, as Thomas was pointing out, and we have been sort of looking into the tools that can help foster demand. Be that the extension of the possibility to exempt zero-emission vehicles under the Eurovignette, be that a very, very clear message also from the Commission that it is important to remain predictable on the long-term regulatory framework, including ETS2, including AFIR. If you are in such a transition, it doesn't help if you cast uncertainty over your key regulatory levers. I mean, yes, to flexibility where it is possible. You have seen that with the CO2 standards for cars and vans, but we need to be clear the overall direction of this transition and the regulatory framework supporting it needs to remain, and I think that has been a very clear message. When it comes to infrastructure, yes, we've been setting up the Clean Transport Corridor Initiative, which I think is an important one because it brings together member states. You know that this has been linked to the new instrument, the competitiveness coordination tool, where we want to work with member states on sort of sets of reforms across borders. We have had very good discussions with member states over the past weeks, and there is one thing which is interesting, and that is, yes, we are in the beginning with infrastructure, but there's also quite a lot happening. So just to give you two examples, under the last cut-off under the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Facility, we are financing already over 2,000 charging points dedicated to heavy-duty vehicles, so trucks, on the 10T. This is about 20% of the locations that we are prescribing as a minimum under AFIR. We will have now another cutoff coming with a 570 million in June, and we are knowing that a lot of big projects are in the pipeline for trucks. And when you talk to colleagues in Germany, you talk to colleagues in the Netherlands, you talk to colleagues in Poland, there are also ambitious national programs underway. I'm not saying that this is sufficient, because we still believe that the market needs to be a sort of market-driven market, and it is, but it shows that there is work ongoing and that the business cases come in from a recharging point of view, which is important. So I think what we need is a little bit of stamina, a positive narrative, and sort of the ambition to drive this together through. Because if you now start to cast doubt and to cast, uncertainty, then you are not only risking the transition. I mean, manufacturers or forwarders have made massive investments and they need to carry through. So I think in that sense, let's push on. And what we have to do better is to better align the different levers, particularly at the national and at the European level. So what we want is that recharging infrastructure is recognized as a key strategic technology that gets fast-track permitting, that gets fast-track approval, and that we understand where we need to improve the grids. And I think that's my final point, and it comes back to the weights and dimensions. So we need to appreciate that we have to invest. We have to invest into classic transport infrastructure like roads and bridges, etc. We have to do it, by the way, also for military mobility. And we have to invest into grids. And you know that DG Move has been saying this for years. We need to invest into grid capacity. Not only, it's absolutely important to make our grid smart and capable of handling flexibilities and all of that, but simply we need to invest into grid capacity if this transition with trucks should work out.
Let's talk a bit about investment, Jan-Christoph. Yeah, you'll have to take that microphone as well, they're telling me. Because we know that it needs a lot of money, and the grids, like has just been said, it's complicated because a lot of times the grid capacity wasn't thought to be taken to the places on motorways and corridors where it needed to. So only in the last couple of decades has that even become really a thought. Where does this investment need to come from? Does this need to be European investment from an overarching? I mean, what's your view on where the money comes from to make this transition?
So first, I would say that this has to be a common effort, and I agree That Mike doesn't like me. And I agree with a lot of what Axel just explained. So I think it has to be a common European effort. We will see how the multi-annual financial framework will look like. But I really think that we need a dedicated tool in order to be able to invest in infrastructure. And this means the classic infrastructure for transport, but this means electric infrastructure as well, grid capacity and so on. But because the reality is that it's not only the 10T corridors, but those who are buying the trucks of the car makers, they have not their spots only on the 10T corridors. So that you need to have the grid capacity at the spot where the entrepreneur that is doing logistics regionally or for long haul, where he has his central, where he has the spot where he has the trucks where they need to be loaded. And this is the reality, but this reality cannot be met at the moment with electric grid. So I really think that we need to discuss as well if the trajectory that is foreseen in the regulation is the right one, or if we shouldn't cherish other technologies that are carbon neutral as well in this equation. Because reality is that not all of the operations, that not all of the business models will go electric at the same time. You will have regional delivery, so not the one the DHL is doing in the cities, into the city centers with very short tracks, but regional delivery services, difficult to decarbonize, to go where it's difficult to go electric. We can decarbonize them with other means. Long haul is another story. So I think that we need to think to differentiate the different and I want to repeat, this has to be technically feasible in the reality of their operations. And we're discussing at the moment a lot on how this should look like at the green table. But reality outside is different than what we're discussing here. And this has to be acknowledged, I think, by policymakers, that yes, we need to invest and we need to invest massively, but maybe other solutions could be helpful in this path to go to being carbon neutral as well.
I'm going to come down to you, Mitra, because this is something that you're having to think about a lot. And you mentioned already the interim solutions, alternative technologies. For you, what are the priorities? What are the ways to move quickly? What are you saying to policymakers about what you need to do when you're talking to them in Brussels?
I mean, something that's not new, and policymakers have heard that for a long time, is of course the recognition of bridging technologies. We're talking on the one hand about biogas. We just have to face, as Jan Christoph was saying, realities that they bring. Emission reductions up to 80, 85, sometimes even 90% if we look at range extenders. So I think we first of all need to recognize they are out there, and this is also how you can basically reduce emissions. Secondly, we have to look how can we actually incentivize them, and how can we also find, let's say, regulatory, legislative tools and instruments to help the SME sector to pick up on it. Because the Scope 1 emissions that we're talking for ourselves, that are 20% only, 80% are coming from our service partners in road transport. And we're talking about a highly fragmented market. We're talking about 95 SMEs in the road transport market. I mean, this is something we have to think about, I mean, with any measures that we're coming up. So we also have to open up a little bit, like, let's say, when we talk about financial instruments and how we can help them, what is working? I mean, if we talk about the demand side, I mean, Axel was just mentioning it, how can we help the demand side to pick it up? And I think there are solutions where it is like, on the VAT side, on the Eurovignette, to make it easier, also recognizing other solutions than only the zero emission, class 5 solution that we have on the table. Let's think a little bit broader, there are ways. I mean, let's sit down and let's discuss them together. I mean, as Jan Christoph was saying, we're talking about market realities, And we're not coming together, and it's also not a DG Move only exercise, it's a cross-DG exercise that's also very important, where we have to discuss with Klima, with Anna, to come together and say, like, okay, what's needed now? What can we do now and in the next 5 years? And what do we want to see in 2035? I mean, again, it's nothing new, and we're happy to discuss and discuss it in more depth, but I think especially on the bridging technology solution side, there's a lot on the table.
Stein, what do you make of that? I mean, from your research, do you agree with what Mitch was saying? Do you think that these bridging technologies should be... I mean, where do you see the mix of all of this going forward?
I maybe want to jump in on the level of some of the incentives, and not just the ones that can be given, or the framework that is not just to be designed by maybe the European Commission. There is also a lot to do at a member state level, at regional level, in terms of providing the infrastructure, but also if we talk about taxation, you mentioned VAT, you mentioned, or we can talk about all sorts of registration taxes for vehicles, where of course the difference can be made between zero emission and other vehicles. Don't forget about road pricing schemes that are becoming more popular, that also could differentiate between technologies, which could mean additional incentives to promote zero emission vehicles in the market. And maybe I want to complete that with a single observation that we had from many interviews with different parties in the market, and it is that there is quite a shared expectance that the TCO will decrease sooner or later, but rather sooner. So the prospects for the uptake of zero-emission vehicles are quite good, I would say.
Let's come to you. Thank you, Thomas. Let's come to you. What are your sort of demands from policymakers going forwards? You want reviews? Something? I mean, what do your members need?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I'm grateful that it was mentioned a few times in this round. This is a B2B market. So for everyone, for this to transition to something else, whatever it may be, interim solutions, whatever, this is where we need to create the conditions. And that's why we keep saying we need to double down on the enabling conditions. And that is far more than just the infrastructure. Infrastructure is a big part of it, yes. But if you have the infrastructure and you have the vehicles, but you don't have a business case, it's not going to happen. So it has to happen simultaneously. And the challenge is, of course, that it has to, a lot of it depends on member states or on the regional or local level. So what does that mean for us? I think what we really need to avoid, and this is a bit also the concern we have with respect to the discussion about different interim solutions. What we really need to avoid is a mismatch between what is required from the demand side and the supply side. We have a very strong regulation framework that requires us to reduce the emissions, CO2 emissions of new vehicles by 2030, in 5 years. We can build the vehicles, but we need customers who are able to profitably operate those vehicles. If we change the regulation framework in a way that incentivizes our customers in a different way than what we need to do, then there's a mismatch. That doesn't work. And on top of this, the big buzzword, but it's an important one here, is what do we want from policymakers? Pragmatism and simplification. So things need to be simple, right? And one last sentence here. I think what we really need is urgently is the recognition that we need to monitor this very carefully, the development of the enabling conditions. We've just launched today on the ASEA website what we call the zero emission tracker. So we can't do this alone, but we're looking at for light duty, but also for heavy duty vehicles at what's the state of the registrations, but also what's the available infrastructure. And everyone agrees there's not enough infrastructure available today. So we need to monitor this very, very carefully every 6 months or so, and then draw the right conclusions and see where we need to adjust further.
Axel, what do you make of those demands, the suggestions coming from the industry, the possibilities of, firstly, regular the last point Thomas was making about regular checkups, keeping an eye on it, not sort of some long-term plan?
Well, I think we have a pretty good regulatory monitoring framework in place. Some say, particularly at member state level, that we have over-regulated the reporting and monitoring and that we should simplify it. But of course, we are looking very carefully into this. And by the way, you know that we in DG Move, we operate the European Alternative Fuels Observatory. We were always a little bit on a second step side with commercial vehicles, but now with a new contract in place, we will have sort of a big push for not only vehicle-related, infrastructure-related data, but also traffic flow-related data, so that we can work there much better. But maybe two more points on the general context. I think what we have learned over the last years is that we are discussing here a twin transition of transport and energy together. And I think when we have all this discussion about interim or bridging technologies, and under AFIR we have kept the provision that member states have to ensure a appropriate refueling infrastructure for LNG, for example, and close it where there are gaps. But we also need to be honest and say that if we speak about something like biogas, it's a thing which is helping a lot of transitions. It's a thing that is helping a transition in the cooking, in the heating, etc. sectors. And of course it is relevant in transport. But then, when you look at our sustainable and smart mobility strategy, we are looking at all modes together. And we have an urgent need, and that's also relevant for DHL, to use gaseous fuels and decarbonize them in shipping, because they have less alternatives there. So we know from our bus markets, etc., that bio LNG buses are really good for the local company. But let's be honest, we have also conditions that constrain the scale up of that fuel to an extent where you would say it is the main go-to thing. And this is, as Thomas was saying, where are we on the trajectories? Where are we on the invest? This is not only regulation. This is global market investments. Where are we going? And I think we will have a considerable push. I mean, all the manufacturers are ready. All their third country competitors, by the way, are also ready. And I think so we should be clear on the broad fuel mix, but also, and that we clearly see in our technology assessments, that the technologies that is maturing quickest and to scale is battery electric. So, and it has advantages for many reasons. What we need to master is a twin transition in energy and in transport. And I think there we will see, and there I agree with Thomas, we need to actively monitor and see if the things come into place. But I think from our point of view, at least we're doing it to the best that we can.
I want to come back to you, Mitch, actually, because while there's like a sense of a need for, obviously, the trust in the policy, there's also in the industry as well, because you guys use electrification of your own fleet and your own infrastructure.
Well, the depots is a whole different topic. I think what we definitely need is, of course, the charging infrastructure at our depots, but of course we need to rely also on the public charging infrastructure. I think that needs to go hand in hand. And I think at the moment, at least, if you ask me, we see quite a different price range when it comes to the depot charging and the public infrastructure. And I see also Axel and Stein are nodding. And this is, of course, on the one hand, it could be, beneficial because it could help the business case. On the other hand, we're still talking about, let's say, we need to the grid connection and the grid capacity is not there yet as we would like to see it. I mean, we always use that example, and that maybe is for a few here in the room. It makes it very concrete because we need one truck, basically. You can compare one truck in a scenario of charging in 1.5 hours with 350 kilowatt compared to 60 vans. at night. I mean, this is as much you would need. So we're talking at some point about depots who would need as much energy like a small airport. And just telling you, we have 7,500 depots in the EU alone. Okay, I mean, just saying, and now you can count it up yourself, how much energy we would need. So I think this is exactly where we are, looking, of course, from the AFE perspective, but also from a depot perspective, what can we do together? And of course, it's not only on us. I mean, there are like lengthy permitting processes, we don't have the right grids at the moment, etc. We have some constraints in some member states, like the Netherlands, etc., etc. So we do our bit in every member state, depending on the situation that is there. But at the end of the day, I mean, we can, even if that would work, I mean, this huge challenge, we still would need the public infrastructure to make it work. And then again, I mean, you mentioned it several times, everybody's mentioned market realities and that we need a positive business case. But this is exactly how we look at things. When we come with a solution or we want to deploy a solution, it has to be a positive business case. And this is why we take any kind of whether it's regulatory incentives or whether it's negotiations that we have at depots, whether it's the price of the energy, we try to take all of that into account and at the end of the day, see does it make sense or not? But again, at the moment, the PUD, so the pickup and delivery, the last mile operation is not really the challenge. The challenge is regional and line haul. And this is where we have to focus. And this is where we really have to speed up.
Yeah, and this is it. I know there's people, whenever we talk in this sector about industry, it always well, the industry's got money, but there's not an unlimited pot of money that can be used to do these things. Let's talk about you mentioned it a bit, Thomas, and I'm going to ask you, Jan-Christoph, to talk to us a little bit about non-compliance penalties and the issues around that, and where you think that could potentially be changed, or where you think, I mean, Thomas was talking about how it all lands on his members, essentially. What do you make of it?
Well, we just made a change in the legislation on the cars, and I think that we should make the same change for heavy duty as well. And we're talking a lot about trucks today. Think of coaches, becomes even more.
Let's take the other microphone. Do you mind passing it down? Let's give it another go.
It's the politician. The politician is muted. So I really think that we should do the same exercise with a targeted amendment on heavy duty, because the situation on the market is different than to the moment when this was decided. So I really think that it's because of lack of infrastructure, because all of the global situation, that we should alleviate this issue. But then the question is what comes after, because this is only a flexibility question. The real question is, do we stick to the plan, as Axel said, or are we more open on other technologies? Not in order to change the end goal of being carbon neutral, but in order of changing the trajectory or adapting it to reality. Because I think I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs that want to buy electric, but they say it's either the infrastructure that is not ready, or the business case is not there because they are operating for someone, and this someone is not willing to pay the extra cost of going electric. So that's why I think that this trajectory that was foreseen, that was discussed at the moment of the Green Deal, is a little bit outdated and needs to be adapted to reality.
Stein, if I can ask you on this, I think your microphone's good.
Yeah. Well, in general, I think that some nice examples are given about why companies still hesitate about going really for zero emission. But as has been told, there are some issues, but TCO is decreasing. We believe that the uptake is going to take place. But let's not underestimate that there are lots of SMEs in that field. Typically, those people will even be more reluctant and be more hesitant than the front runners to adopt new. It's not just a new propulsion system, it's a whole new logistics system around their company, the investments they need to make, the whole organization of their own supply, the uncertainty that is there about a great number of things, the price variables, the electricity price, the diesel price, and so on, depreciation value, a number of factors. But if smaller companies or less innovative companies see that others are front running and are really adopting, I think they will follow. It's very hard for us to tell at what speed it will happen, but it seems to be happening and to be going to happen. So I think that the target remains clear. There is something evolving, clearly evolving. In this case, nobody discusses the final goal, which is very much different than in many other aspects of life. And it's hard to say at what speed it will happen. But there is a strong belief that it will happen, and that we will see when, what exactly will be happening.
It's one of those things that, like, in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, we'll be able to look back and see the mistakes and see where things could have changed. And there are a lot of people saying different things right now of what we need to do. But one of the things that the truck makers are very concerned about, Axel, is that they'll be, I mean, on this slightly, will be dumped with a big bill at the end of this, that it lands on their head. Are there ways that you are trying to assuage the fears of that happening when or sort of providing some sort of comfort to them as this transition happens?
I can take a very easy route. I could take a very easy route to this answer and say, well, you know, I'm responsible for recharging infrastructure in the Commission, and this is a question which you should ask to my colleagues in DG Klima. You will not hear from me today a message on the review of the CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles, simply because there is no planning yet. So, I mean, and so, of course, the Commission has announced also in the action plan that we are going to review the entire regulatory framework. We will see how this will play out in the months and years to come. And then, as it was announced, I mean, where there is a possibility to improve flexibility, I think there will be a strong, and, you know, this is not me, I mean, I'm just executing stuff. But I mean, there will, of course, be an interest to say, if there is a flexibility without endangering the pathway, let's look into it. So I think this aspect of looking together at, you know, things like the ETS, like the CO2 standards, like the recharging infrastructure, that is, of course, it is enshrined. That's the way we are writing the action plan. But I think it's too early to say now, you know, we will do X, Y, Z. So I think to that discussion we will have to come back later. And I repeat, and maybe one thing which is interesting, and then I shut up. If you look into the discussions we have had on the revision of the Clean Vehicles Directive in 2017, very similar. Electric buses back then were not fully mature. They were considered to be very expensive. We had in the Council a lot of member states being super hesitant about setting mandatory minimum requirements for public procurement. We had the Parliament, which was very pushy on it, and in the end there was an agreement. And now we basically see that the minimum procurement targets we have under the Clean Vehicles Directive are, except one member state, all exceeded in every member state, because the market itself has gone much higher than what we have set. And why? Because it's a good technology, because operators have started to learn. Now we can discuss it's public transport, it's public budget. We know the implementation conditions are different, but we're a little bit behind the curve with trucks. They have come to technological maturity a little bit later, but you also speak to the people who run them and who like them, and the drivers who like them. So I think here I'm with Stein. I mean, it's a bit too early to say, but there are also many good sort of ingredients in the soup which make you think that if all the things come together, including on the enabling side, including on the price incentive, and by the way, it's not only weights and dimensions, the whole thing would be very much helped if we could finally get to an agreement on what we do with EU energy taxation on this continent, because that is in desperate need for an agreement. I think then there is a business case and it will go forward. But of course, it is not easy, but nobody is helped if we now reinvent the wheel every 2 years.
I think we could have a full other panel about EU energy taxation, so we won't go too deep into that, although it is a really important point. Thomas, I'll come to you, because from the competitive point of view, for the last, post-Draghi report, competitiveness, the buzzword and everything, the truck makers, European truck makers, are a huge success story and are the most competitive in the world. But as you mentioned, it's this sort of B2B business, so it's slightly less easy to sort of sell publicly, is it? I mean, I don't know how we change the mentality. We've talked a lot about the practicalities, but perhaps some mentality changes need to happen. I wonder if you can talk to that.
Yeah, so I mean, what we definitely don't want to change is like that our customers are now beginning to buy the vehicles, invest in the vehicles with anything but the calculator, the famous calculator, right? They should continue to focus on the TCO of this. At the same time, you mentioned competitiveness of indeed, it's a huge industry, right? It's often perhaps not forgotten, but it's kind of taken for granted in the web of our economy here. But if you look at this globally, indeed, the European headquartered manufacturers, truck makers, they do have significant, and by that I mean like 75% plus market shares in almost all of the major regions. The one difference being China. So that is a different element here. But to give you an example, to make it perhaps a bit more tangible, one of the manufacturers recently told us, do you know what it takes in Europe to build a new truck, type approve a new truck? So what is to get the permits, right, the technical requirements? It's a little more than 20,000 pages. 20,000 pages to meet the regulation requirements. I think that should be addressed.
Do you know what it is in other parts of the world? Is there a comparison there?
Well, I don't have a comparison here, but Europe did, of course, always pride itself with leading with regulation, right? So I think there's a fair guess to say that others are not exceeding this, probably, and it's quite excessive anyway. So I think, indeed, what we need to make sure is, and Axel, you mentioned the example of the Clean Vehicle Directive. It's a very good one, indeed. And it's good that we are, for example, with the urban buses, are exceeding many of the targets. Yet, we have a 90% sales mandate in 5 years, 2030. So we're wondering if the last 40% here that we need to cover, if those who need to invest in those buses, municipalities, cities, these are not anymore the big ones. This is everyone. If our municipalities and the transport operators are actually equipped to make this jump. So, and a good share, you can argue about the reason, a good share of the urban buses that are operated in today under the also invested by the Clean Vehicle Directive are non-European manufacturers. So that opens up a whole new debate here, new discussion area. But that is something that we need to keep in mind as well. We need to acknowledge again, decarbonization and competitiveness need to go hand in hand.
And there's a shift in the thinking between them, and they sort of need to marry them up and match them as we move forward on this. Just a reminder to our audience, we're going to start. I've got some questions coming in on the Slido already. I'll start taking them in a few moments. Mitra, I want to come back to you though, because you are a global company and understand this from a global perspective. Perhaps you can give us examples of anything that you can say that works in other jurisdictions, other places, any things that you're learning that you're implementing in Europe? Where does this work from a sort of global perspective?
No, I think we're I mean, of course, I have been now made my case that we need to focus on the enabling conditions, but I think we really want to make this kind of twin transition that Axel was mentioning. We really want to make it work. We also want Europe to be, you know, the front runner in showing that it can work. And again, we are one of the companies being at the front with our targets, and we really want to see that happen. And this is also why I again mention that we still need to reduce emissions now. So whatever we're talking about for an individual company with having like these very ambitious targets, we have to look long-term, medium, and short-term. And we have to make a business case, a positive business case under each of these solutions that we roll out. And of course, we have a huge footprint in Europe. I mean, more than 50% of our workforce is in Europe. We are, let's say, a German company which operates globally. And of course, we would like to see everywhere, I mean, a similar pace. But also we don't see the similar pace, let's say, in the EU and in the different member states. So also there we need to like really pick up, and whether it comes to the grid, whether it comes to the permitting processes, that also differs from member state to member state. So I would really like to focus here, you know, to do our homework in the EU and with the member states and try to really make that work. Because if we don't manage in the next 5 years to work on this twin transition and really have that as a successful, I'm not sure where we're going to meet our targets, and if we're going to meet our targets, similar for us, because it will backfire also on the individual companies who are at the front. And I think that is very clear, and this is why it is so important to take into consideration these like different positive business cases that do exist, and see also what does the industry in general and the different actors in the industry need to make that as a business as a positive business case, and also to come together and find this solution and talk to the policymakers and what needs to be done now and what needs to be done in the midterm. I think that's very important. I mean, whether it is also in our case, like when we take concrete examples, we also look into battery storage. We look into battery swapping. I mean, there are much more solutions out there where we try at least to, you know, find solutions at our depots that help this kind of like energy demand that we're seeing coming forward. So.
Talk to us about battery swapping. You're
looking into it ourselves.
Yeah.
But we know it's working. I mean, at the end of the day, we have little time to basically charge our trucks at our sites. They're coming in, they're driving during the day, they're coming in, they need to be charged quickly, they're going to get out again. They can't be charged like the vans during the night. So it's a different business model. How are we going to use them?
They're driving for further and for longer.
Of course, depending on the regional transport or line haul that we're having, international transport, depends. But we need to equip them with the necessary, let's say, whatever solution we're going to go for. So that's why we also look into hydrogen, we look into electric, but again, we're also looking into these bridging solutions because we reduce our emissions through these bridging solutions at the moment. And there, again, will be a big share when we want to meet our 2030 targets.
Jan-Christoph, these sort of conflicting pressures of green and competitiveness and all of that. I wonder if you can talk to that. Do you get the sense in the policy making? I mean, you're sitting in a lot of these committees and trilogues and having these discussions. Is there enough of an understanding of streamlining the policy in a way like that's going to help the industry?
I'm not sure that I have a good answer to this question, to be honest, because so first the preparations are done in the Commission, and I think that they have a good overview. There are still conflicting views sometimes in the Commission between different DGs, which is a normal thing because you look from your angle, right? That's everybody does this. But I think the issue is more that we are so much under time pressure and that the policy making is so much under time pressure and has been done already. Green Deal has been done under time pressure, and sometimes you have this. You're on a bumpy road, right? And there are regulations that are not coming, even though that they were foreseen, and so you need to adapt to this. And sometimes you have all of a sudden a war of aggression in Russia, where Russia attacks Ukraine, which shifts all the priorities and shifts brings us into a deep energy crisis, which has not been foreseen and not been calculated with. So it's adapting under those conditions, which is complicated. And then you have policy standpoints where. I mean, I'm a policymaker, so I can say this. There are some that are quite stubborn and that say, well, we said this, we did this, so we stick to it. But sometimes sticking to it is not the right solution in a world that is changing. So, and policymakers are not always the best to be able to adapt to new realities. But I think there's a push from industry at the moment, and in the industry, minds are changing as well. I work a lot on aviation. In the past, all aviation companies said, no. All those alternative fuels, they are for us because we need them. We have no alternative than going on alternative fuels. Now they're understanding that the fuels industry needs a business case as well, and that maybe it's interesting to have alternative fuels used in different modes of transport so that there's investment and capacity. So people are changing their mind, they're adapting to reality, and policymakers are not always the most quickest in this.
Thanks for your refreshing honesty there. It's nice to hear sometimes.
Me, huh?
Yeah.
I did not talk about me.
Exactly. Stein, maybe you can give us a sort of positive outlook. What's a good way for us to go forward? I mean, there are lots of issues, and we've heard much about them during this, but perhaps you can give us a sort of a positive route that can go forward from your perspective, because you've been researching this, you've been looking into this. There is a good way out.
I would say that the main driver is the ultimate goal to have much lower zero emissions in a foreseeable time, and that driver remains the same. I mean, hopefully, all things that we are experiencing now, the war and so on, energy prices are rather short-term things, and the long-term remains that we need somehow to greenify transport. Transport is responsible, I believe, for trucks are responsible for 25% of emissions, of CO2 emissions on roads, and transport in itself is responsible for quite a few percentages of CO2 emissions in Europe. We need to go that way forward, and I think also this case, the heavy-duty vehicles, it's a nice way, not just to do things, but also to show to the large public that really something is happening in this market. So it's quite visible. It's not always the best visible market, but it's still a very well visible market. And I think that mental aspect can play a role as well in the end.
Thomas, I can see you nodding along there.
Yeah, indeed. So, and I would like to pick up on a sentence that Axel, you said earlier that, and I think Jan Christian, you policymakers like to back winners, right? So yes, there's plenty of problems, plenty of issues that we're all discovering and identifying here. At the same time, I mean, for the vehicle manufacturers, we've made the investments and we continue to make the investments. It's a lot about continuous innovation. We have vehicles available today, a wide range. They cover a good range of the use cases. We need to see them mass deployed quickly. For that, we need the enabling conditions. At the same time, I mean, as I said, there's continuous innovation ongoing, right? It doesn't stop here. And at the same time, I mean, I mentioned the figures earlier here. We have a 3.5% of new registrations in Q1 25, zero-emission vehicles, everything above 3.5 tons. And if you only look at the heavy segment, it's much smaller, 1.5% only. But honestly, no one in these 1.5% has bought the truck for fun. So someone is figuring out and is beginning to figure out how to make this a business, to work this profitably. So this is indeed where we need to look at very closely, and I'm happy we're having this kind of discussion here. Where are the issues in the individual use cases, and how can we accelerate jointly finding a solution?
You don't think any of this is like a test? It's always
Well, it's certainly early adopters, right? At the same time, I mean, this is serious investment.
Big money, exactly, yeah.
So, yes, there's companies out there who, and again, it's early investors, but it's also early adopters, and it's also perhaps one or two and a few have perhaps these vehicles in their showrooms, right? Just to show that they're operating them. But I would argue, well, it's probably not 3.5%. And the ambition that everyone has been expressing here and continues to express in the industry is, of course, we need to go much faster beyond those early adopters.
And we need to learn from them as
Yes.
well. That's one of the priorities, is that find out what the early adopters are doing with this.
Indeed, and the challenge is the trajectory, right? We always said we're not so much concerned about the 2040 targets in the long term here. We're very concerned about the steep ramp up needed until 2030.
Okay, so for the audience, get your phones out. Now is a good moment, and drop your questions into Slido. We have a few already, and I will start putting them to our panelists. Also, to everyone online, you can use the Slido tool. So it's on the screen. #HeavyDuty on Slido.com, or go to the QR code there. So let's start. The first question comes from Luke Parker, and it's to you, Axel. We'll run through them. There's quite a few. There's a few, so we'll just try and get to them and take them as you can. This one is: with demand for energy increasing across all sectors, how will DG Move work with DG ENER to ensure the transport sector remains as important an important part of this discussion and tangibly benefits from such investments?
Well, I directly answer, yeah, we work very close together with ENER, and you know that the colleagues in DG ENER are preparing for a big grids package later this year to tackle some of the aspects we've been discussing here. So transparency, predictability, enhancement of capacity and all of that. And we are, of course, discussing, we're not the only sector. I mean, every sector is sort of making its demands, but we are for sure making sure, and there's also where the Clean Transport Corridor initiative, for example, helps to remind everyone that this is really an important sector which needs to get priority.
A lot of questions have come in, and as often happens, they are for you, quite a few. But we're gonna, because everybody wants to know about the policy. Is mine? Yeah, mine's still going. But there are a couple of others. So one of them actually is for you, Mitra, and actually for you, Jan Christoph. Let me find it again. Where's it dropped down? What role do you see for carbon neutral fuels, such as renewable diesel, in achieving emissions reductions, corporate and regulatory targets for future and existing fleets? This is from Emmanuel. I'm not going to try and pronounce this name off, but from Moreover, yeah. I'll start with you, Mitra.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, if we're talking about e-fuels, I mean, obviously we have a, let's say, cross-transport mode perspective, because as DHL, we not only have trucks, we have also planes. We operate also in maritime. So, I mean, we do not necessarily see e-fuels as the solution in the road transport market, because we have alternatives compared to other transport modes. So we're really looking into, you know, electric and bridging technologies, at least for the short term. But with regard to e-fuels, I think we need that for the hard-to-abate sector.
So I don't want to talk only about e-fuels. I would like to say that I think that all alternative fuels have their role to play, including bio. The problem at the moment is that they're not counted in for the achieving of the target. Apparently, Commission will come up with an amendment on cars, wanting to make e-fuels counting in. That's at least what Ursula von der Leyen has announced. I'm curious to see the method the Commission then would like to apply. And I think that we should think about, because it's this short-term issue of achieving the emission reduction targets, that we should use alternative fuels in it. And I'm open, and I think at the end, battery electric will be the best technology on the long run. But I think in the meantime, we should use all alternative fuels.
Emmanuel Desplechin, I think, is the name there, by the way. Thank you so much for your answer. I saw it, I was like, I can't read that immediately. There's a question that is being liked a lot by the people that are using Slido, and this is definitely for you. It's from Tobias Block, who wants to know, will the revision of the CO2 emissions standards for heavy-duty vehicles, similarly to the car review, be brought forward to 2025?
I think I answered that question already. I have no information on that. You need to answer, my political hierarchy on this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's what everybody wants to know at the moment as well, in some sense. Okay, let's move on. Let's see what we can...
If I may add on this question, I think politically in the parliament there would be for this. If a commission comes forward with something, would be supported in parliament.
Yeah. And the council, from your sense?
Council is, like always, a black box.
Reading the tea leaves over there. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go on to the next question. This one is for you as well, Axel. Does the Commission recognise renewable fuels, slightly on what we were talking about before, are a compatible energy carrier to electrification? For example, overnight charging from renewable electricity is not possible without energy carrier. That's from Joachim de Moyne from AECC.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to recall that we have this sort of a double pillar regulatory framework.
Yeah, we're really juggling the microphones.
Maybe it has nothing to do with you or me, but something.
Hold it a little bit closer. Sometimes they need to slightly.
You see, they keep. For years, technicians tell you that they hate it when you basically bite into the microphone and you learn your lesson, and then come along you. So
yeah, sorry.
No. I think. So I think. We have this discussion with the two regulatory pillars, which Jan Christoph was also referring to. We have the CO2 standards for newly registered vehicles, which have rules, and then we have the Renewable Energy Directive, which sees a very ambitious mandate for renewable transport fuels by 2030, which was actually also doubled in the Fit for 55 package, and which plays, of course, across all the modes of transport. And I think we have always said we are, and this is part of the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, all sustainable alternative fuels have to play their role in all the modes of transport according to different degrees of relevance and maturity. So, and this is informing the Commission's approach, this is informing the European policy approach, and as Jan Christoph was already alluding to, the Commission has made a proposal for the recognition of e-fuels under the CO2 standards, which goes in two steps. First, the recognition of that category under the type approval, which is a necessary step to introduce that category into the CO2 standards. So the ball is now also a little bit in the field of the co-legislator, here particularly the member states.
I want to give anyone an opportunity, or should we carry on through the questions? If you want to jump in on something that's been asked, a lot of them are directed towards you, Axel, but if anybody else wants to jump in, that's possible. Okay, Eleonora Rinaldi from MLEX wants to know, at the beginning of the panel you mentioned a readiness report coming up. Could you further elaborate on when that's expected?
We have a communication requirement report requirement under the AFIR, because when we adopted the heavy-duty vehicle recharging and refueling infrastructure targets, member states were adamant to demand that at an early time on, they get a report whether the assumptions underpinning the maturity expectations for technologies would hold true in the market. So this report is nearly ready. It would come actually any day now. And it's just sort of a reporting where we look across the different technologies and the infrastructures and sort of assess where we are in terms of maturity and readiness.
Okay, all eyes. We're looking out for it. Quentin Donadil has asked, this is actually for everyone can jump in on this a little bit as well, will the upcoming Clean Corporate Fleets proposal include HGVs in its scope, and what do the other speakers think of this as well? Can you talk on that? Yeah. Would anyone like to come in on it, Thomas? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I can start perhaps. We continue to say, and we also published a position a couple of months ago on this, that this is a B2B market, right? So what our customers need first and foremost is a business case, is the ability to operate the vehicle's infrastructure and a business case, TCO, cost parity. As is sometimes discussed in the arena, do purchasing mandates, to put it very black and white, for anyone, any operator, transport operator, in the absence of a business case help? Probably not. So they will probably distort the market. However, and here comes the point, we think that there is actually a lot that can be done to stimulate the demand for heavy-duty commercial vehicles. One thing is public procurement. To put it a bit bluntly, taxpayer money should lead this transition. So you mentioned the Clean Vehicle Directive, Axel. We're convinced that actually public procurement influences a lot more than just the purchasing decisions for buses. There's many truck applications that are directly or indirectly influenced by the rules of public procurement. And then the third element here, or the second stakeholder, if you want, is we have the shippers, right? I mean, it was mentioned before in the discussion, and I totally understand that this is a very complex interrelationship between the different actors in the transport logistics sector. But it's also clear that those who buy the transport services have a little freedom, or should perhaps, freedom is perhaps the wrong word, but they should have a strong incentive to consider an increasing share of zero-emission vehicles or shipments. How this is being done, it's a different story. Again, should the transport operators at the very end of this chain have a mandate, purchasing mandate, in the absence of a clear business case? We don't think that makes a lot of sense.
Anyone else want to come on, Mitchell?
Yeah, happy to add a few points here. I mean, mandatory purchasing targets, we do not believe that they actually, lead us to the, let's say, even intention from what side, whether Commission or also from other stakeholders, to raise the demand. I mean, first of all, we don't need to discuss again the enabling conditions that are not met at the moment, but they would also raise the prices artificially high. And then you cannot use them. You have them on the depot, and what should we do with that? Now, even introducing it for shippers, it will end up on our table. From our table, it will end on the table of our service partners, and we're talking again about 95% being SMEs. So I don't know where we're going to see a positive business case. And if everything is about competitiveness in this term, then I would really hard suggest to look into it, whether it really leads to more competitiveness in the market with mandatory purchasing target, to be very honest.
Jan-Christoph, you want to come in? We're really running out of time, so
just very briefly, I just think I'm not sure that at the end Commission will propose such purchase obligations, to be honest, because they will fail immensely, and they will struck down in Parliament and probably even in Council. So I hope that they are so wise that they will not do this interference in the market.
You're going to need to. I can't. The time may be running us down.
First of all, let me answer the question, because the question was whether heavy-duty vehicles are in the scope. And from our point of view, yes. We are looking at corporate fleets in the totality of corporate fleets, and that of course includes heavy-duty vehicles, because heavy-duty vehicles is a 100% corporate market. And then I think it was already mentioned. So let me just clearly state this: we've been mandated to assess the possibilities for a legislative initiative in this field to ensure a certainty on demand. But this is not a discussion which is solely focused on one measure, which is mandatory fleet purchase targets. So, of course, in the public discussions, this is always a reception. What we're discussing here is basically a market which in heavy-duty vehicles is 100% of registrations, and in light-duty vehicles is 60% of registrations, more or less, which is influenced by many different levers. So ranging from the taxation that member states impose on new vehicle registrations to road usage conditions, not only Eurovignette, but also the local and regional sort of instruments you have there, etc., etc., etc. And I think we published a communication in the beginning of March where we kind of outlined this complex landscape and where we said there are already a lot of levers which member states can do to help make the business case for corporate zero-emission fleets. And in our impact assessment, we are looking indeed very carefully, as Jan Christoph was saying, into what can make sense to help achieve the objective. And the objective is to accelerate the demand for zero-emission vehicles. And here we are looking at all possible levers, not only, but of course we've been asked to look into it, into mandatory purchase targets.
Thank you very much. We have to leave it there. We're out of time. Can we have a huge round of applause for our panelists, please? Thank you so much. Really grateful for the dynamism and the quality of the discussion. A big thanks to everyone who's joined us online as well. That's it for you, but for everybody here in the room, if you want to join for a bit of coffee and hang around for a moment, I know there were some more questions and you can grab some of our panelists. So a big thank you to everyone. Cheers.